Alright everybody, welcome back to the Frozen Music channel. We will be continuing on with bases today, and if you haven't noticed, the setting hasn't changed, and my attire hasn't changed. So as you may have been able to guess, I'm doing most of these all on the same day. Why, you might ask? Because I promised a couple of friends that I would. So today, we're going to be taking our model bases, and we're going to be taking them a step further. Now, the bases that I've shown you so far how to do should take about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. These ones will definitely end up taking 10 minutes or better to complete if you end up using these techniques and steps to be able to give your base a little bit more love and care, a little bit more time. It'll end up going much further in helping show that, or help showcase that story. Now, once again, I'm doing all these videos from my iPhone, so these videos are long, hard, and uncut. And you will just have to end up sitting through all the ums and ahs and heres and theres and all the mistakes that I end up making. Nobody's perfect, except for maybe Bob Ross, for which I am not, unfortunately. Any case, so what we will be doing is we'll be using a 2-layer method for painting and a 3rd layer of textural paint. Now, I prefer the Citadel paints produced by Games Workshop just because I've used them for the past 11 years. They flow nicely, they have a good selection of colors, and then their textural paints as well as their technical paints allow you to do some pretty cool things with. That's not to say that the paints produced by Privateer Press are any worse or any better. I do like to use those as well, but just for ease of access, you'll be able to find the Citadel paints at most of your comic book stores, if you're in the US at least. So we will be using our first layer here, which is Gorthor Brown, and that's going to end up being our base layer. Next, we're going to be using Baneblade Brown. Yep, Baneblade. I apologize. I promise that English is my first language. Baneblade Brown. And then to top it off, we're going to end up using our Agrelian Earth textural paint. Now, the thing with the Agrelian Earth that I really like is that as it dries, it'll begin to crack and kind of give you a very dry feel. It'll end up kind of telling a story of perhaps this was a swamp, or maybe it's on the fringes of a swamp, and these are just the mudded areas that have dried out and started to crack. Now, with the Agrelian Earth, when you end up putting it on, the more paint that you end up layering on, the larger the cracks are going to be. The less paint that you put on, the smaller the cracks are going to be. So, how we're going to start off is we're going to end up taking this pre-prepared green stuffed base. And again, this is my preferred method. You can do it however you want. You can end up using your glue stick, and you can smear it around, or you can use your super glue, or you can end up kind of doing your stuff directly on the green stuff when it hasn't completely dried yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our Gorthor Brown, which is going to be our base, give it a nice little shake, and we're just going to add a nice little layer onto the green stuff. So don't need to be particularly gentle or sparing with it. There we go. About like so. There you go. All right, and then you're going to want to usually wait for that layer to dry. Now, in this case here, you're going to want to take your brush, just wipe it off on a paper towel. You don't necessarily need to wash it out. It'll help add another little bit of a layer, or shade, I should say, to what you're painting. So, we got that done. And now, we're going to end up taking our Baneblade Brown. Yay, I said it correctly. And we're going to take, oh, excuse me, gotta mix it up real quick. There we go. All right, so we're just gonna pop this guy open, and we're going to go over effectively the high spots. So this guy is still a little wet, but you know what? Normally, like I said, you want to wait for it to dry and it'll produce a better effect. But, you know, since this is just a quick tutorial video, I'm going to just press on. And what we're going to do is we're just going to brush over the high points. Now, this is kind of similar, what I'm doing here, to what Bob Ross would be doing, in that it is a wet mixing, and that you are wet mixing it on what you're painting. So if you ever watch any of his TV shows as he's painting, you'll notice that he doesn't end up waiting for each layer to dry, because as he puts more layers on, they kind of mix and blend together. So you know, you could end up getting some nice little brown effects by mixing, or excuse me, painting additional layers of lighter shade brown on a base that your base layer is still wet. So we'll end up just doing that, hit that high ridge there, a little bit there, a little bit there, and kind of leave that little divot. All right, so there we go. If you kind of see that, I apologize, the lighting isn't all that great. So we went around the edge here, and we ended up hitting it with a Bane Blade Brown, which is a little bit lighter shade than what our base is. Now this little cracked recess right here, we ended up leaving that the base color. That'll kind of help give it a nice little shadow effect. So just like before, you're going to take your brush, and you're going to just take a piece of paper towel or something, just rub it off. You don't need to necessarily wash it out. And then next, we're going to take our Grellian Earth, make sure it's nice and shaken up. And we're going to take this base, which has already partly been pre-done. And you can see it's still a little bit wet. I was playing around with the Grellian Earth a little bit before I started this video. And yeah, I don't know if you guys will be able to see it here in the camera, but right in here, I put a very nice thin layer of the Grellian Earth, and it's starting to kind of crack around the sides. And same with over here. Now the middle, I put a heavy amount in, and as soon as that's done drying, I'll end up getting larger cracks from that, which is exactly what we want. But I'm going to end up adding a little bit more, because these smaller cracks are not exactly how I imagine the base is turning out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to dab on a healthy amount more, the Grellian Earth down here on the middle. And this is one of those things where you're going to want to use a lot. So really stick it on your paintbrush, and you want to just take and you're going to dab it on just like that. You're not going to paint it, you're going to dab it on just like that. Alrighty, that looks pretty good. That should end up cracking up here pretty soon. So now we're done with that. Add as much Grellian Earth as you want. Like I said, the more you put on, the larger the cracks will be when it's still wet and after it dries. If you end up taking the Grellian Earth and you put a nice thick layer on, and you decide, I really don't like those cracks, just kind of take a little bit more and just add a small amount to the top, and that'll kind of cover up those larger cracks and add another nice little layer. So now you can really wash off your brush, but I'm just going to rub it off here on this paper towel, get rid of all the excess paint. And again, this base is also still drying. As you can see, there's still the Grellian Earth drying here in the middle, but as you might be able to tell, there's a nice large divot there in the center. Now, I wanted that to resemble like a puddle almost, or what was once a puddle. So I'm going to want to have more Agrelian earth, a thicker layer of it, dabbed here into the middle than I am on the outside. You might or might not be able to tell that here on the areas that are dry on the outside, it is cracked. It is not cracked overly much. They are very small, but then again, I only brushed a small bit on. So for this, and you'll notice that I really like to end up using the gray sand for most of my models, or at least most of my bases. So I'm just going to end up taking, now again, you're going to want to wait for this to dry, but since this is just a quick tutorial video, all I'm going to do is I'm going to add some glue here off to the side, maybe a little bit up here on the ridge, over here on this side, just like that, and call that good. And I'm going to take it, and because I'm still waiting for the middle to dry, I'm just going to rub the edge into my thing of sand, being careful not to get any on the Agrelian earth that's still drying, although if you do, it's not going to hurt it. So shake off the excess, and there we go. Looks pretty nice. You can see I still end up getting a little bit of sand in the Agrelian earth that's still drying, but that's okay. So I'm going to take, again, Army Painter tufts of grass. These are the Deadland tufts. They're a little bit more on the kind of grayish side. But with the effect that I'm going for these bases, that's exactly what we're going to want. And so let me pick this up for y'all real quick. All right, so you can see that the divot kind of runs out, almost like it was had a small stream coming from it of a sort. Maybe somebody dug a small trench to try and drain the water from this puddle. But then right up here, we've got a nice ridge. So what we're going to want to do is, well, what I'm going to want to do for this, so I'm going to put glue all along that ridge. And then I'm going to take my larger tufts of grass, and I'm just going to push it on there, right on the edge, just about like so. Now, push it down nice and firm, then take your finger, rub it over the top of the bristles, kind of get them to stand back up a bit, and there we go. So, you've got your nice brown, you've got your nice bits of sand, so for your model it'd probably be more akin to gravel, and then we've got a little bit of lighter gray, almost a little bit of green for these tufts of grass. Now I want to add just a little bit more because it does feel a little bit empty. So I'm going to take my glue, I'm going to put a tuft of grass on each of the sides of where the stream is coming out. Now these, I'm going to use the medium-sized tufts, and I'm going to push it on. I'm going to play with those bristles a little bit, just like so. And you know what? That's looking a little bit bare right there, so I'm going to add a little bit more glue. I'm going to take one of the larger tufts. I'm going to kind of close that gap up a little bit. There we go. All right. Yeah, there we go. I do like that. All right, so now what we have is we have our nice little ring of dark sand, which kind of helps provide a nice contrast, as well as our Agrelian earth that's still drying. And even if it doesn't really crack, and honestly, with how it looks right now, it almost looks like a mudslake. And I kind of like that. But once it dries, like I said, it's going to end up cracking, and it's going to give it a nice dry feel to it. And then I just took and I put the tufts of grass just where I thought that they might go. And it honestly doesn't look too terribly bad. I would definitely put a nice painted model on this, and then put it into a tabletop game. Now, you'll notice that with this gap right here, and with this larger gap right here, you could take a model and, or depending on what their pose is, stick 1 foot in each of the gaps, almost like they're crossing over this former puddle through these bits of grass. Now these these tufts of grass here will also kind of provide a little bit of story as well. Like maybe this area was growing a nice lush, it would be a very nice lush watered area, but as time went on, it started to dry out, so it started to crack, and the water drained away, leaving the grass to kind of wither out and die. Or maybe it was a battlefield and it just got turned into a massive swampy muddy mess as the formations marched back and forth across the field, delivering blows until one of them finally came out victorious and the other retreated or was completely annihilated. I think one of the best examples that I can end up giving of this is you watch a medieval movie, and after the battle, the ground is incredibly muddy, and in The Witcher 3, if any of you have played that game, you'll notice that in the opening video, or the opening cinematic, that the two forces that are fighting out on this field, it's nice and grassy. But then when you go and you visit the field itself, it's all muddy and swampy and nasty, and you have to fight some pretty interesting creatures on there. So that's going to end up concluding for this video. Or, excuse me, I do have a couple other things to end up talking about. Now, when it ends up coming to like your winter bases, you can follow the same process with adding another layer of paint before you actually start to put on your sand, your tufts of grass, your rocks, things like that. And that will also go a long ways to helping liven up the base a little bit. So you'll see that the snow has a little bit of a grayish tint to it. Now that's because I didn't end up actually painting the base underneath. And for example, here, this one is from the first video that we made. Right here, we end up adding a second layer of snow. Now that's one way that you can also end up getting around if you don't want to necessarily paint your bases. And you'll see right around here along this edge, a little bit gray, because we did not add another layer of the sand for snow effect over here. Now, if you're doing snow, I would recommend that you end up using a lighter, maybe kind of a bluish gray paint, and then you end up going over with a off-white, and then you finish off with a third layer of white, like white scars white, if that paint still exists. They change the names fairly frequently for the paint, at least as far as what I can remember. And once you end up getting all that taken care of, you will end up with a base that looks kind of like this. So this one, I did end up putting a small base layer of white. I didn't end up doing the multi-layers like I was suggesting, but just for a quick example. So right here along this edge, I put a layer of white. Over here, I put a layer of white. But over here on this back side, I did not. Now, if you can tell, this is whiter, this is a little bit more gray, just to show you how much of an effect by painting the model bases before you actually start building up the terrain on them can have an effect, and it does end up showing. Now, the bases are there to help convey the story, and just as much as what your model is on how you painted it. So, with that being said, I'll end up signing off. This video has been rather long, but I hope that you all found it very useful in the progression of building up some model bases for your minis. Thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful day.